New beta update, new changes for Haitham. After the changes from last week, which straight up nerfed Haitham's damage output, people started to hope and beg for MiHoYo to revert those and make Haitham great again. While the nerfs were historically bad, Haitham was still in a good spot, so I wasn't overly gloomy about them. This week, Haitham received a buff, and while it's not a direct reversion of last week's nerfs, you'll be pleased to know that it's a significant change in a good way. Also, Yao Yao received slight changes last week, which I didn't address, but which also changed some things regarding her pairing with Haitham. Let's get straight into it. First, let's see what changed. This week's nerfs look more traditional, as MiHoYo weakened some parts of his kit while buffing others, which is usually their way to go with beta changes. The part that got weakened about his kit is his how to attack talent, as all of his normal attacks received a 12 to 15% nerf in terms of multiplier value. Of course, this isn't ideal, because normal attacks were a pretty integral part of Haitham's rotations, especially after the charge attack nerf from last week. This kind of levels the field between his different types of attacks, and makes optimal rotations a bit more vague to find out. In terms of damage loss, this might look quite significant at first glance, but in reality it's not a huge deal, as his main source of damage was always his elemental skill, while his normal attacks were a much smaller portion of his damage. Actually, Quicken always made his normal attack damage look much better than it would have been otherwise, and that, of course, didn't change. Still, it's a nerf, but it's nothing to be sad about, thanks to the next change I will show. His elemental skill got a significant buff. While his 1 mirror damage specifically got a nerf, his 2 mirror and 3 mirror projections especially got a buff. It's really a significant buff, because in standard rotations, getting mostly level 3 mirror procs is easily possible and realistic, which is awesome, as the 3 mirror multiplier got a 20% increase, both in terms of attack scaling and elemental mastery scaling. Level 3 mirror procs were always his main source of damage, as he also has a talent that gives a damage buff to his mirror projections and elemental burst hits specifically, so this change is way more relevant than the auto attack nerfs. This change is also probably a way from MiHoYo to clearly show that Haitham's damage output increases the more mirrors he has. This was always the case, but since the damage of each mirror previously decreased the more you created, it was a bit confusing for some people. Overall, I would say this is the finalized version of Haitham in terms of playstyle, meaning a character that should aim to have level 3 mirrors up for as long as possible during his rotations. The last change is also a positive one, as his A4 passive got a slight increase in terms of conversion from elemental mastery to damage buffs. This isn't very significant, and it's still worse than the first version of his passive, but it's a welcome change nonetheless. Overall, in terms of damage buffs, Haitham got a 7 to 8% damage increase depending on the weapons, with elemental mastery weapons benefiting slightly more than others because of the A4 passive buff. This doesn't mean that the buff is basically a reversion of last week's nerfs, as I said. As compared to week 1 Haitham, he's still marginally weaker with his optimal combos, and his burst DPS viability took a huge hit regardless, so him being less flexible is still the case. Still, this should make everyone happy, as his personal damage output got a good increase. Talking about Yao Yao now, she got very slight multiplier changes across the board, but the truly meaningful change is about her particle generation. In fact, Her bunny hits will now generate 1 particle on a 1.5 seconds cooldown, instead of 1 or 2 particles every 3.5 seconds. This is obviously a buff, as she's now able to generate 5 particles per rotation consistently instead of 3. In terms of how this shapes the outlook of her pairing with Haitham, this is extremely positive, as it makes her comparable to Nahida battery-wise, and even superior in some cases. Since it was realistic to expect Haitham to have energy issues of some kind if you lacked Nahida, this should be a relief for all the people that lack the Dendro Archon. In fact, Yao Yao is shaping up to be a really logical partner for Haitham on all teams, kind of how Diona is a great partner for Ayaka and cryo units in general, as she provides great healing and good particle generation for him. Considering it seems that, based on most recent leaks, they'll be on the same banner, them working well together only makes sense. As it currently stands, Yao Yao is a direct upgrade to Cookie on all Haitham spread teams, and should be an interesting option for Nilo Bloom teams, which were in dire need of another healer that could fit the team well, and potentially replace Kokomi. I'm done for today. As always, if you liked the video, make sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe. See you next time!